Welcome to Raising the Bar, the podcast that pulls back the curtain on the country's most successful leaders and how they elevate their business and their teams. Please welcome our host, Alison DePauli.
Hey everybody, welcome to the next episode of Raising the Bar, where we talk to CEOs who are raising the bar in their businesses and their industries. And today it is my pleasure to have Jennifer Gamboa. She is the co-founder of the Sustainable Health Index, which you know is one of my pet projects, and a serial healthcare entrepreneur. So thank you, Jennifer.
Thank you. I really appreciate that intro, and I love the serial healthcare entrepreneur. That is very much defines who I am. I'm very happy to be here.
I'm happy to have you, and I think you your journey is so interesting to me. You've been a serial entrepreneur. You started with body dynamics, then you moved into some teaching, and then you lassoed Mike Riley. And the two of you founded the Sustainable Health Index. And all of this is about advancing the health of the humans. It's not siloed anywhere. It is health of the humans. How did you arrive at this? Because this is a passion for you.
Oh, it really is. It really is. So, I think it started, I'm trained as a physical therapist, and I started sort of my career in physical therapy. But before coming to physical therapy, I was a dancer. I was a professional dancer, and there was no concept as a professional dancer that, the hip bone wasn't connected to the knee bone, right? Everything was integrated, and how well you performed was not only had to do with how well you felt about the choreography or muscularly, but also how you felt about your teammates. Was the theater cold? Was the theater warm? All of those things. So it never occurred to me that healthcare was siloed until I got into PT school. And then I was like, oh, wait a minute. Why are we not thinking about this holistically? So it is always, that's always been my orientation and perspective, that people live in a context. They run, jump, and play in a context, and that context influences what their journey is like and whether they get better or not. And that was just reinforced within my physical therapy clinic. I could have two people come in with low back pain. I could clear out the musculoskeletal side of those things equivalently, and one would get better and one would not. And the one who did not often had so many other psychosocial issues coming in. So very, very early on, I felt like we needed to work. I needed to work within an integrated team. So Body Dynamics is an integrated health and wellness clinic, and it's still in existence today. And we really do work with integrated plans of care. And the idea is that we need to understand a full context, and we need to explain that to the patient in front of us. They may or may not want to address all of those elements, but they at least need to know that it's playing into their healthcare and how it's playing in. Honestly, our number one referral within Body Dynamics is into counseling. That is,
really
always a huge factor in chronic cases. So
the
very, very interesting.
The Center for Aligning Health has done some studies and determined that 80 to 90 cents of every healthcare dollar is a social determinant of health issue, not an actual medical issue. It is a social issue addressed in medical form. And I think that in what I see, but I haven't done the research. So it is remarkable to me how much, and I'm surprised and not surprised to hear that you refer into counseling more than you do anywhere else, particularly for body things. You just hold them in your body, right?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And, there's also really interesting, a lot of the autoimmune diseases that we see, so we often start to catch the precursors of autoimmune diseases in physical therapy because people start behaving differently. Their tissue starts behaving differently. It's like, hold on, something's not tracking here, because true musculoskeletal is really straightforward. It responds very predictably. So when things don't respond predictably, what's going on? And it's so interesting that when that sympathetic nervous system is on overdrive all the time for whatever reason, whether it's anxiety, depression, just type A personalities, all of those kinds of things, that constant sympathetic fight, flight, or freeze cortisol into the system really does change the tissue, and it breaks down tissue, and it changes how we respond to health and healthcare. And so then you have to look at what's keeping that sympathetic nervous system in overdrive, and that's always context.
Mm-hmm.
Always context.
And so as you send people to counseling, do they come back to you? Can you close the loop?
It's often simultaneous. It's not one or the other. We don't believe it's not a chain. And that's actually why Sustainable Health Index is designed the way it is. It's a radar graph. It measures in a graph because we are an interconnected web. All of our systems are interconnected, and our care needs to be that way too. It's very hard. People don't like integrated care. Providers and systems don't like integrated care because it's not a linear equation. It is much more of a sort of this quadratic equation where you can yank on one side, and if that starts to get better, you might see changes in the other side, even though that wasn't a direct line of care. So we do this. We don't chain it sequentially. We often overlap it because we get better faster that way.
Yes, and I think from my side of that equation, it's one of the reasons that we like direct primary care so much, is because a direct primary care physician can take the time to say, there's this thing, it's called sleep. You should maybe try 7 or 8 hours. And, you need to go walk around the block with the dog, without the dog. It doesn't matter. Just go walk around the block. And, maybe something green won't kill you. And if you don't like green, try orange or yellow. And those conversations, so they solve some of the immediate problems, right? I can't get to a doctor. I have a cold, I have a flu, I cut myself, whatever. But over time, they help lower A1C levels, they help lower stress levels, and everything else improves.
Yeah.
And it's
I don't think there's any question that sort of that lifestyle behavior modifications absolutely support better health. They minimize and prevent chronic disease, but they also can really impact whether or not a gene gets expressed for an acute disease, right? So all of that is so mission critical. What we do find is that sometimes advice is not the same as, and education is not the same as action. And so I've just had the incredible opportunity within Body Dynamics to be able to actually walk the journey with people. And so we refer within our practice or externally to people who are, less expensive ways to intervene, but people still need support. So, for exercise, for example, my philosophy has always been, we can educate, we need to provide a group environment, and we can provide a one-on-one environment, and people can enter wherever they feel like they need the most support, financially, education-wise, support-wise, community-wise. But we need to act in a community, and we need to create a community that supports health and well-being. And so that's what we strove to do within Body Dynamics. And that's really what I then when I saw the power of that, right? The power of not only giving people the information that they need, overlapping the information and not siloing it, but also building a community where they feel safe, they feel supported, and they are willing to take the risks to make the changes. That's when you start to see this exponential or logarithmic impact.
Yes, and I think that we don't talk enough about the risks of that change. Typically, if you're changing somebody's lifestyle, you're changing everybody's lifestyle around them, or you're causing them some distress because they have to change.
Or it's really hard. I mean, that's the other piece that we don't understand, right? Oh, well, I want you to eat red and yellow and green and purple vegetables, but actually you can't get them in your neighborhood. And so, you have to travel 2 buses and make sure you remember do your grocery shopping before you leave work. So there are a lot of other barriers, community barriers, that we don't think about, and are, it's great to give advice, but how do you actually remove barriers so that people can make the changes that often they want to make, but the barriers are just insurmountable.
Yes, we have an area of town in San Antonio, and it's the 5 poorest zip codes, and the average household income is under $5,000 a year, and which is mind blowing to me. That's about 49%. 63% are under 14,999, under $15,000 a year. And there's a food desert, and there's a transportation desert, and so even when people want to change, it's almost impossible.
Right.
There is an organization I used to be on the board of called Family Service, and they have put something called the Neighborhood Place. There are 38 organizations there that do everything from teach cooking, bring food, help people get their GED, but it takes all of that. Now, we're not going to spend our time talking too much about that, because we might spend 2 days on that alone. But I think that you have taken that model and leveraged it into the Sustainable Health Index, because you are doing something very similar in an employer base.
Correct. Right. We are really asking employers to, first of all, understand the lay of the land. It's very hard to understand the lay of the land. I think, there's a lot of support from insurance brokers and advisors and consultants about sort of, here's what your health spend is.
Yep.
But there's not a lot of understanding about why is your health spend there. And we really are trying to get people to move upstream. There is, again, no question. If you look at the triple aim, if you look at the quadruple aim, all of that is saying move upstream and we can decrease cost. But moving upstream challenges thinking, and it means that a company or an organization that has power over an employee has to really stop and say, what am I doing that's actually causing my employees to behave, or maybe not causing, but contributing to my employees behaving in a way that I don't want them to behave. And I really learned this again when I started applying the body dynamics model and the Sustainable Health Index to local employees or employers before I met Mike, before we really launched Sustainable Health Index as a company. And there were, things like just schedules, like shift schedules. If you produce your shift schedule the day before you want people to change, that's really hard for them. And they get pretty frustrated, and then they get pretty cranky, and cranky workers, funny of that, they tend to get injured, or if there are battles going on between union and management, that all shows up in workers' comp, funny enough. So those were the conversations and 2 major employer contracts in the local area that really we were able to make powerful differences, not only by working with the individuals, but also by working with management to help them understand, if you change these 3 factors, you're going to not only gain goodwill, which goes a long way to reducing, in this case, your musculoskeletal injury rate, but it also will change behavior in very specific ways. So that was sort of my training ground. And then Mike and I got together and we started testing this out with other employers. And one of the first employers we worked with for a short period of time was with a company, a manufacturing company that they really viewed it was amazing. This is a company essentially had a company town, if you will, right? They were the primary employer in this space. They had the idea of direct primary care. They had on-site clinic. They had a lot of the pieces, all of the stuff. But they had an attitude and a systemic policies in place that punished the employees for stepping off the line. So you can have a clinic, but if your employee is punished for stepping off the line to go to the clinic, they get a demerit. They're not going to use it. Or if you have a clinic that says, I'm not going to empower you to help yourself. You must come to me because I am the expert. And therefore I need to guide you and I need to coach you and I need to do this. At the same time, they're getting demerits if they step off the line.
They're not coming.
It doesn't align. And those policies, those very policies are working against what the company was trying to achieve on their healthcare spend. But they would rather incentivize people to attend a quit smoking program. Not a bad thing. That's a good thing.
Right.
But they can attend that sort of after hours, or to manage their diabetes medication with a pharmacy benefits broker. Again, not a bad thing. But if you would allow them to step off the line and go to the primary care provider who's on site when they need it in that moment without penalizing them, you might get a better outcome. So that was, kind of our first experience. Oh my gosh. First of all, we need to get the provider out of the way. We need to interact directly with the employee so that they have agency. And then once we have information, then we can provide that information to management, but really protect the employees. They need to have agency. We need to be able to sort of speak the truth about what's going on in their employee community and what their opportunities are for creating change. So
how were those changes? How were those identification of issues received by the employer?
So it takes a unique employer. It really does. So I would say that we often, you've identified exactly that, is that there have historically been companies like, I don't really want to know, and I don't want to make the changes. And this first company that I spoke of, that's exactly what they said. And they're like, no, we're not changing it because I don't trust my people. They didn't use those words, but that's what happened.
But that's what they mean.
Yeah. And so, their costs kept going up, and, we just said it wasn't a good fit for us as a company. We learned a lot. The next company we went into, very similar. They wanted to help, and so in this case, these were folks that were captive for 30 days at a time. And the employer was absolutely responsible for the schedule. They were responsible for what was in the pantry. These employees just disappeared for 30 days at a time into employer land, right? To execute. And then, and so this employer had done away with their cooks a couple of years back because that was a line item expense that, didn't make it. They were trying to save money in that year. And that makes, okay, that's a decision to make. But their diabetes was now
out of control,
charts and out of control. And so we made some very simple suggestions. So once we gathered the data, one was to change the shift schedule. They had a kind of, for 30 days at a time, captive audience, but they had 6 hours on, 6 hours off. So they didn't have enough sleep. They didn't have enough time to eat properly. They didn't have enough time to exercise. They didn't have enough time to take care of any of those things. And when we said, if you just changed the shift schedule to an 8 on, 12 off, 12 on, 8 off, some sort of more
broader window.
Yeah, a broader window. Thank you. A broader window that you just getting enough sleep would start to impact your numbers extraordinarily. And then if you either brought the cooks back or stocked the pantries with food that had, the yellows, the greens, the purples, and instead of sort of one shelf short of a marshmallow, again, you would go a long way to really improving your numbers. Like we don't want to do any of that. Okay. That's fine. And so within 1 year, they increased their healthcare spend by $5 million for 500 employees. $5 million, 500 employees. Now they had a health coach or a nurse navigator there. They were navigating, they were doing all of how do I decrease the cost of the medical transactions that are taking place, doing all of that. But you can't overcome the fishbowl, right? We talk about this, it's the fish, it's the water, it's the bowl. Your individual fish, no matter what you do, if you put them back into a dirty water, dirty bowl, they're going to lose. And you're going to lose. And that's so we try and make selections a little bit more carefully now in terms of who we partner with. And we partner with companies that first of all want to know, and then are willing to really ideate with us. We're not going to come in and say, no vendor can come in and say, you need to do X, Y, and Z.
Correct.
But But a vendor can come in and say, here are the trends we're seeing. Here are the things where you are going to get the biggest bang for your buck if you change X, if you change Y. And some of our most successful clients, I mean, for example, we're looking at a client in recently, and their biggest issue was stress. And when we dove into stress, specifically the attributes that were at issue were financial hardship and death and serious illness. Now, no surprise, death and serious illness over COVID.
Sure.
But there was a lot of grieving going on, and it tied into financial stress. And so the more we talked with management, the more we kind of walked through the scenarios. What they themselves understood was, we have a financial management service that works with us. We really need to make sure that everybody knows about that. That was already available, right? Financial counseling was already available. But the thing that was beautiful that they came up with was, we also have an emergency Pto Bank that we're not really advertising, but people could contribute to it or take from it. And that's what they need, because that death and serious illness, they need time off, and they're afraid to take time off because of the financial pressures. You can't, you don't get that kind of scenario. You don't get that kind of understanding from looking at your medical bills.
No, and I don't think that most employers understand the financial stress that most people live with every day. And in my world specifically, if you have an average employee making $50,000 a year with a $5,000 deductible, right, that you have functionally uninsured them, because they will never seek care until they get run over by a bus, have a heart attack, or their femur is sticking out their leg, because they're terrified of what it's going to cost. But, when we reframe that as, well, you make $250,000 a year, it's like you having a $25,000 deductible. That's crazy. Yes, it is. And right, that's how we reframe that conversation. I think a lot of people just don't realize the stress that everyday people, for a zillion factors, right, which most are none of our business, but that person shows up at your work site, and that is your business.
It is, because it comes with them. They don't leave that at the door. It all comes with them. So,
and that kind of stress will lead to a heart attack. Right. It'll lead to elevated A1C, right, many things. Right.
Absolutely. This same company that we work with, they had a lot of musculoskeletal issues, right? And that was, and they could have dealt with when we did their health insight map, we saw disease risk was high. We saw fitness behaviors were poor. We saw movement quality was not good. We saw nutrition. I mean, sort of everything. It was
everything.
A mess. Right. Where do you start? Where do you start? And of course, knowing the grieving, knowing the financial hardships, start with empathy, start with caring and concern. In this case, starting with the musculoskeletal made total sense. They had an on-site option that, again, they weren't really leaning into. They weren't really advertising, and the employees didn't understand that if they go to the on-site option, they have no copay. There is no financial hardship.
Yep.
So again, figuring out, that's the thing you need to focus on. I'm not asking you to spend any more money. I'm asking you to make sure that your employees really know. And when somebody is hurting, that you send them there, whether, you don't have to wait until it hits your claims deck. You can actually start much earlier. And it shouldn't matter whether they hurt themselves at work or over the weekend, because it's going to become a workman's comp issue no matter what. So just let them go into care before it's a.
Yes. And I think that's one of the things that not just me, but many people of my ilk talk about is turning an unpredictable and sporadic, fairly large expense into something predictable, repeatable, and low cost, because that is much easier to manage in your budget. So this affects your budget, not only the humans, right? So we are talking about humans, and businesses work to exist to produce profit, but the humans need to be capable and healthy and productive as well. And those kinds of strategies are, I have a client, and they're my favorite, which I'm sure I shouldn't say, but they talk a lot about well care. We don't want to focus on sick care. We want to focus on well care. And they do a lot, not always in the way I would do it, but you know what? It's not my business. And they right down to cooking demonstrations. And they're always very popular. And they've got people that they've done things with that stop smoking, and they're still walking around the block 5 years later. They walk around the buildings. There's a few more buildings now, 5 years later. And those things have really made an impact, and they didn't cost anything.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. And that's really, that's the social ecological model, right? We talked about social determinants of health and the social ecological model. What the social ecological model says, when you talk about population health, and it's there's so many people who use that term without really understanding what it means, right? But we've had this journey from sort of the biomedical construct where medicines extended people's lives, through to this biopsychosocial, which at least recognizes that stress is part of physical and biological manifestation of disease. But the final piece is environment. And that's what the social ecological piece is. It says environment and context, not necessarily just the trees and the air we breathe, but truly the context, the environmental context and community within which we live drastically impacts health.
Would you talk a little bit about your first case study with students? Because I think that is such a good example of how the fishbowl affects everything.
Right. Well, let me back up a little bit. And what the social ecological model really says is that there are 4 or 5 layers of a fish, water, and bowl community, right? And it starts with the individual, but then it also it's who the individual interacts with. And then it is the community resources, and then it is in some it's also organizational resources, but I often combine those two. And then it's finally policies and procedures and systems. So if you ask an individual to change, and that's in the center of this rainbow, if you will, and all of these other layers are actually acting against the individual behavior, they're pushing in, and they're going to just compress and create such barriers that the individual can't win. Alternatively, if you start aligning all of those layers towards the same goal, towards the same outcome, then everybody sort of follows the course of least resistance, and you get what you want. The hardest part about that is thinking about the alignment and tweaking the strategies to get better alignment. The hardest part is coordinating, having those conversations and really coordinating those efforts. Once you get that in play, then you really start to see extraordinary results. And that's what that case study shows. So this was a case study of students. We looked at 3 years of students, and we looked at first year and second year students, and they actually were physical therapy students. We knew that stress was an extraordinary issue. So we did a baseline measure the first year, kind of said, okay, here's generally what we're seeing. How do you want to respond to that? We really didn't know it was just a very investigative early on. And then once we saw, it was not only stress, but it was fitness was poor among PT students. The food, the nutrition was poor among these are healthcare students, right? But exactly, it was the time, it was how their classes were scheduled, it was all of those things. So what this group did is they did 2 things. They sat down. Not faculty and students sat down and together started to say, how can we create a more aligned strategy? We want you to get through school successfully, but we also want you to be healthy and be able to model good health. And so they started there, and then they stayed within the department, and then they had to go externally. They found people with food insecurity. So they said, hey, did you know our university has a food pantry? So they made sure that the food pantry folks were connected in. They had healthcare service, certainly mental health counseling on site. but or on campus, but it was too hard to access. So they brought in a resilience training course and embedded it into the curriculum, so that now people had to actually go through this resilience training course, which so it was easy. The students had to participate, and in the participation they started to generate their own healthy water, healthy bowl, if you will.
Yep. And your results
so
were
it was
pretty
just
remarkable. 9 and
Yeah, they
15%
are.
improvements.
Yes, truly remarkable. So what we did is we essentially measured every at the beginning of every semester, September, and then in December when finals hit, right? And we followed first year, second year, first year, second year, first year, second year. And what we're looking, you're never going to eliminate high risk. You're never going to eliminate an event, right? But to your point, it's that creating a predictable, repeatable, and kind of low cost strategy. That's about increasing the low risk group, right? And so that is what this study showed, is that over the course of 3 years, not only did the students get better sort of at the first semester, or at the beginning of the semester and at the end of the semester, right? Their low risk categories grew, they got more robust, they were more resilient. The more remarkable piece, that was predictable because we were impacting them. The more remarkable piece was the third class that came in that we didn't have any real influence on, because it was our final testing cycle, and they came in COVID. And they came in with a low risk pool that was equivalent to the previous 2 years of intervention. And that's the X factor that the social ecological model has demonstrated again and again and again in research and longitudinal research, is that when you clean the water in the bowl, the fish start to manage themselves. So instead of directing the fish, it's in combination, but when you clean the water and the bowl, the fish start directing themselves and each other. The school of fish start taking care of the individual fish, because you're building community. It's that interpersonal relationship building that's as influential as any policy and procedure, as long as that policy and procedure doesn't prevent that kind of community. And that's what that article or case study demonstrates so clearly.
And we're going to link the case study in the show notes, because it truly is remarkable. And I think it can be incredibly impactful for employers, which is our market and yours as well. By adjusting your environment a bit, not only do your own fish swim a little bit better, but you get healthier fish.
You do. You end up recruiting healthier fish into the system. So what's really interesting is the CDC. You can look at breast cancer care. You can look at colorectal care now, cancer care, bunch of other conditions. They've actually mapped out the social ecological framework. So it starts with what are we trying to get to happen at an individual level? What are we trying to get to happen at a social relationship level? What are we trying to get to happen in community? What are we trying to get at a policy level? They're mapping it out. And that's really what the Sustainable Health Index approach is for employers, is let us help you map it out. We can't tell you the exact answers because we don't know your environment, but what we do know are the questions to ask and the questions that need to be answered. And the other piece is both the CDC and the World Health Organization are very clear, based on longitudinal, 20, 30 years of research. You have to address at least 3 levels to have sustainable impact. And every study that looks at, maybe 1 or 2 levels, they do it because it's easy to measure. Did your A1C level change? I gave you this diet, this exercise for this long, and did your A1C level change? Right. But actually, your diabetic community got bigger.
Yes.
Right. But it's easier to measure the individual changes than it is. Exactly right. But when we fail to look at it holistically, our results are not sustainable over time.
I think that, to me, that is the biggest takeaway, is that you cannot address the little thing. You have to address the whole community, and you have to shift your thinking a little bit. And I think workplaces are changing.
Yes, I agree.
Workplaces are becoming more communities than they used to be. And I think that enables this a little bit more effectively.
Yeah. And I think it becomes more critical because I do think that the current generation of employees are looking for something different. They're not, they really are looking to be able to embrace all of life and, happy to work, but, they've got to be able to do other things as well. And that's, I think it was so interesting when Mike and I first got together in that first company we worked with. There's a very, parent-child kind of relationship where the employees were treated like children. And I just don't think that employees in this day and age have that patience, and they shouldn't. But I think employers have to understand that as well, right?
Yes, I think, but I think that changes the whole framework of how you manage your business, right? Because if you're a manufacturing firm, you need a line to run, right? And you may need to run it for 2 shifts, or you may need to run it for 3 shifts. So that, but and every employer I know, I just had lunch with a colleague of mine, and she had 2 people resign, one of them properly and one of them rather juvenilely, and cannot find anybody to replace one of those people. And they're actually they have quite a good reputation, but people want something different. They want a different kind of meaning from their work, I think. And I think this contributes to that.
Yes. Yeah. That's our goal anyway. That's what we believe.
What is your best advice for an employer to start on this path?
Honestly, I think that's why we created the Sustainable Health Index. It's to get some data. It's to get some of that social ecological data, which is what the Sustainable Health Index does. It really measures the circumstances and conditions that are influencing a person's health and well-being, and gives and at an individual level, they get a cool map and they get resources and they can link to all sorts of things. But at an aggregate level, the insights that are gained are always extraordinary. And that's how you begin the dialogue. And you share the data, sharing the data not only with management, but when you share the data with the whole workplace, the workplace will come together to start solving. That's what we'd recommend. It's super easy to get started. Just get the data, and then you can decide. We always, not every solution is expensive, and not every solution is, crazy off the wall. Often they're very practical, pragmatic solutions, but you don't know to do it unless you can see. Right. And that's what we really try to do, is we really try and bring that social ecological information forward in a way that is so easily visualized, so that people can make better decisions.
I like that phrase, social ecological framework. I think that has less emotion attached to it than social determinant of health. I've seen people go when you say social determinant of health.
I think the social determinants of health, sometimes employers will say, well, how can I impact, right? How can I impact that? Whereas the social ecological construct says you are their context for 40 hours a week or whatever it is. You are their context. So what in your context
can you do
is either contributing to or assisting, contributing to the illness or assisting in the wellness, right? And it's not just about, well, we've got an app. We've got an app for that, right? That's, education is not, information is not change, right? It really is about building the relationships, and the important relationships to drive change, to drive health and well-being. And that's what we try to do. We try and identify, where are the relationship holes? Where are the system holes? Where are the policy and procedure holes? Where are people falling through the cracks? Or where are your policies inadvertently really creating the exact opposite type of behavior than what you want?
And I think you have a client that one of your solutions was for the C-suite leadership team to take a walk on a regular basis, whatever that regular basis was. And anybody who wanted to talk to that particular person could go on the walk. And they were sure it wasn't like a 3-hour adventure. It was a walk, around the building or whatever.
Right.
And that proved to be incredibly effective in many ways.
Mm-hmm. The walk and talk affinity groups. That's exactly what we recommended, and they're still getting that started, but that has been powerful and been meaningful.
Yeah, I think people feel valued. They can access a person who can answer a question or may not know something, or my friend who I was having lunch today, we were lamenting, we were both having car issues and getting loaner cars and whatever, and there were some process issues. The person that designed this checkout process did not actually think about how it was going to get executed, and once it was brought to their attention, they're like, oh my God, I never thought about that. Let me fix that. And I think that you can get a lot of that out of a walk and talk process.
Absolutely. And I think it's, again, to your point, so many people just want to be heard, and they want to know that they belong, that they matter. They want to be known, heard, and they want to belong.
Yes. And I think when you accomplish those things, you create an incredible sense of loyalty and a productive employee. And we all need productive employees to run our businesses.
Right.
And for them and for people to have healthy lives.
Yes.
Not underestimate that.
Yeah.
So any other guidance for employers just getting started besides reach out to you, and we'll make sure that they know how to do that?
Well, I think that with so much focus spent on, or so much focus on the medical spend, that the more people and organizations can look upstream, the greater their impact is going to be on their medical spend. But it won't be in that year. I think that's the other piece. So, you look at the study that we did, the case study we did, it was a 3-year process. But by the end of 3 years, oh my goodness, they would never have turned back from all of the things that they put in place. And they really, the environment and culture was completely different. So that's what I would say is, don't be afraid to go upstream. Don't be afraid to look at, we do strategic planning all the time for businesses, for the revenue generating side of things, but your people are part of that revenue generation.
They are.
And so do the strategic planning for them as well, right? And that is a 3-year cycle. It's probably not a 1-year cycle. And
yes.
I think that would be my biggest recommendation, is that to invest wisely in your people. It's the same as investing wisely in your business. You have to look beyond a 12-month scope. Some of the things you'll be able to implement in 12 months, and you might not see the results for 24 to 36 months. But that's normal. And that's the way business cycles run.
Yes. And I think we will leave it there, but I think that was outstanding advice. Go upstream and pull people out of the river, or don't let them fall in, as Desmond Tutu says.
That's exactly right.
So thank you very much for joining me today. I really appreciate it. We will drop the case study in the show notes, as well as how to reach out to Jennifer. She does some remarkable things, not just the Sustainable Health Index. And we will see you next time. If you enjoyed this episode, like it, give it a review, share it. That's how we spread the word. And it means a lot to me. Thank you. Bye-bye.
We hope you've enjoyed this episode. Raising the Bar is powered by Altiqe Consulting, the country's leading independent expert in healthcare cost containment. Astute employers know there's a better way to offer health insurance, and we help them achieve it.